Jim. To be fair, last night I did tweet that he was really rocking the plaid jacket, trying to make up for a couple years ago. I don't think you can't grasp the gravity of this particular moment for me. I started coming to this conference the first year that it ever happened. I was newly minted spiritual formation pastor, and I sat back in the back. There's a plaque back there commemorating that moment when I was here, and don't look, there's not a plaque. And I just sat and I listened over the next few years to Dallas and to Richard and to Jim and all the other wonderful people who have spoken. And I thought, these are my people. And ever since then, it's just been this amazing moment. So you don't understand how much of a greater grace it is for me to be able to give back something that has given me so much over the last almost 10 years. 10 years? You don't even look that old, Jim. It is good to be with you. There are some things, though, that I want to talk about. There are some things that you should never say to a child. I want you to imagine a suburb of a large city. Let's say Chicago. And I want you to imagine a house in that suburb with a long asphalt driveway. And at the end of the driveway, closest to the garage, there is a haggard-looking 30-something with his arms folded and one leg out. The bags under his eyes can tell you he needs some sleep, he needs some rest. He's been working a lot. He started a new role at a new church, and there's a lot of expectations on him. At the other end of the asphalt driveway, there is a wonderful, beautiful, cute little 5-year-old girl riding a bike. And you can tell from the way she's riding, this is probably the first time without the training wheels. And so she rides the bike up the driveway, gets to the end of the driveway, gets off the bike, turns the bike, gets back on the bike, and rides it back down. Her little blue bike helmet, brand new, never touched. And as she rides around, every time she comes by the haggard 30-something, she says, "I don't want to do this anymore." And so you have to keep going. You have to keep doing this. And the irritation level begins to rise. And finally, she comes around the last time and she throws the bike down. And she says, "I'm not doing this anymore." There's some things you should never say to a child. Pioneering neuroscientist Eric Kandel says this: without the mental time travel provided by memory, we would have no awareness of our personal history, no way of remembering the joys that serve as luminous milestones of our life. We are who we are because of what we learn and what we remember. And I believe that. I believe that every person in this room and every person you will meet is who they are because of their memories, because our memories make us who we are. They shape us, they form us. These things that we've experienced, so every class you teach, every grocery store line that you stand in the back of wondering why that person is paying with, what is that again, a check? Come on. Every one of those people is shaped and formed by the memories that have gone before. And because of that, you can definitely say there is no such thing as formation without our memories. If they make us who we are, then they are the material by which God makes us who we are going to be. God starts with us as we are, not as we should be. And so he moves us forward. Dallas Willard, and I can't believe it's taken me this long to quote Dallas in a talk, but Dallas used to say that everyone is in the process of spiritual formation, whether it's a healthy process or an unhealthy process. All of us are in the process of formation. And our memories actually are the things that drive us in either the healthy or the unhealthy direction. Our memories create either the melodic or dissonant strains of that domestic hymnal by which we all live. They make us who we are. I want you to imagine, if you will, a sanctuary, a church sanctuary, like an OG church sanctuary. It might be yours. I don't want to put it down. The church I grew up in, we had blood red carpet, and it was everywhere. I'm not sure what the plan was for evangelical churches with blood red carpet everywhere. It's a little overwhelming. and all the faux oak furniture and all of that good stuff. And I was sitting in the back on a July evening, a sweltering July evening, and I watched our pastor, who was this short little bald guy, no offense to bald people, but he was both. And you knew that he was really getting into the message because the top of his head would start to match the carpet in the sanctuary. And I just remember him teaching us, one day, Jesus is coming back, and there will be lightning, and there will be thunder. And then he said, y'all better be ready. I grew up in southern West Virginia, so everything was y'all. Y'all better be ready. I was a teenage boy. Everything I did was fodder for repentance. There wasn't 4 minutes in a day that I didn't do something, even in my brain, that Jesus probably wasn't okay with. So I began to feel like even the meteorologists were aligned against me. They're seeking my judgment. So every time there was a thunderstorm, I'd be like, dude, we cool? We good? Because it's getting stormy out there. So if you're coming back, let's just make sure everything's good. The story of God that's crackling within us, that's alive within us, is one of the most important challenges in our formation. That story of God is the story that I lived by for most of my early Christian life. The God who rides on the thunderclouds. There wasn't a whole lot of healthy growth that came from that. There was a lot of fear. But I have that memory deep inside. And so what had to happen with that is something had to change. That story for me didn't come naturally. It didn't come because I thought of it. It didn't come because I thought it was the right idea. The story came from my memories, from all the things that I had heard, from the things that I had experienced. And so in this book, I'm kind of playing armchair neuroscientist, if I'm being honest. I'm not one of those, but I started to see some really interesting things happen when I started to look at memories. And I started to see some interesting things happen in the way that we talk about how our memories come to be. Because I don't know if you've ever really thought of that. I hadn't until I started diving down this rabbit hole. Our memories are very interesting, and so I was trying to find an image, a metaphor. You know, preachers, we do metaphors, and it's like this. And so I began to think about my family, and we take these vacations, and every night we would go, when we go to the beach, because that's where we love to go. I mean, we're in Kansas right now. Would you like to be at the beach? Fair enough. Kansas is great, but beach wins. And so we would go out at night, and we would go to collect shells. And when you're collecting shells, a lot of times you find some that are perfect. The edges are all round and perfect, and it's the white, pink, and you flip it over, and it's that beautiful pink color on the inside. And then some of them, you pick them up, and on the outside, they're just crusted with seaweed and nastiness. But then you flip it over, and it's this beautiful translucent blue on the inside, and you pop that in your pocket. And then some of them, the edges are cracked and shattered, but the color is just so wonderful, you're like, I'm keeping that one too. We all go through life collecting experiences. Every one of our memories begins as an experience. Taste, sight, touch, and smell. And after that, they go to become memories. If they survive our short-term memory, which a lot of mine's super short, yours may be longer, 30 to 60 seconds we have with an experience before it goes away, except for smell. Here's your Jeopardy moment. All of your smells go straight to long-term memory. So if you've ever smelled a child's vomit, it is with you for the rest of your life. You're welcome. Nobody smells a skunk and goes, I wonder what that is. Skunk is skunk. We remember that. But if they survive our short-term memory, if we pay attention to them, they become fastened into our long-term memory. And the things that become fastened into our long-term memory end up becoming stories. And stories are the way that we see the world, the whole world. If a child is bitten by a dog, he has the experience of pain and anguish and fear and the sound of the snarling, the sound of the anger of an animal. And then that experience has become a memory, and they remember, I remember the time I got bit by a dog, but then that becomes a story, dogs bite. Now I realize this is an unfair metaphor because we should be insulting cats, but let's just push past that for a second. But then that story begins to shape the way we see the entire world. And then it becomes a script. It goes from an experience to a memory to a story and then to a script. And a script is the way that we live in the world. If our script is that dogs bite, then we avoid all dogs. If our script is that God is an angry judge on the thunderclouds, then we pray every time there's a storm. If our script is that someone who is in a position of power and authority within the church abuses us, then everyone in the church in a position of power and authority abuses us. Friends, there's no amount of spiritual practices, silent retreats, or conferences like this that can compete with that story of God. And it's not just because of the story, it's because it's wired deeply into our brains. Our brains have changed shape. Neuroplasticity says those experiences, and I realize, like, it was so good of Jim to give me the post-lunch session to talk about neuroscience. Our brains actually shape around this idea and hold it in. Our brains are different because of what we've experienced. And so it's not just about, oh, just change your story. It's about the physical shape of your brain holds the story of God. You can't just change it. It actually needs to be redeemed. Something different is going on there. I come from the word-based stream, the word-centered stream, and so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today has to do with the scriptures. And some of the simplest things that we find in Scripture have a lot to do with memories and telling us and redeeming the story of who God actually is. Even the Ten Commandments, let's go with the simplest Bible moment ever, the Ten Commandments. Even the Ten Commandments has everything to do with memory. Because if you notice, God doesn't say, hey, I'm in authority, do what I say or else. Have you heard the thing about the thunderclouds? That's not how he starts. In Exodus, he starts with this. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. He doesn't start with do this or else. He starts with, y'all remember who I am? Y'all remember where you've been? You remember how bad it used to be? Do you remember redemption? Do you remember rescue? This isn't just for Egypt. This is for Israel. This is just for you. For you. Do you remember? Do you remember when you were in slavery and now you're not? Do you remember that? Now, since that's not true anymore, honor the Lord your God. Keep the Sabbath. Not because I told you to, but because this is who you're going to become. God begins to redeem that story. Our healthy formation flows from our remembering the true story of God. That's where it comes from. For Israel, for the New Testament world, and for us today, healthy formation flows from the true story of God. But in order to get there, because some of us, you might be like me, you've heard enough untrue stories of God. The gift of Jim's book is that we're talking about true and false narratives. Getting past the false narrative is how we understand who we're supposed to become. But how do we get there? Because I feel like we have a choice of what to do with these two narratives, with our memories, with who we've known God to be. We can choose to believe that they're irrelevant and forget them. We can choose, like Pumbaa, to put our behind in our past. But that's not helpful. And that's actually not possible. As the Rabbi Baal Shem Tov says, forgetting actually leads to exile. See, for Israel, when they forgot who they were, good, bad, or otherwise, they got lost. For us, when we forget, even the hardest memory, the painful and the poetic, the brutal and the beautiful, when we let those things go and pretend that they're irrelevant, we forget who we are and we lose our way. We can't choose to forget these things. We can't choose to believe that they're irrelevant. And I get it. As a spiritual director and as a pastor, our memories are a mess. Our memories are a dumpster fire. So this is going to be difficult. So if choosing to forget them isn't a possibility, then we have to choose to redeem them. We have to choose to join with the journey of Jesus in the kingdom of God that is unshakable and begin the process of the redemption of these stories and scripts that have dominated our lives. It's like Moses. Moses is born, floated down a river in a basket, like you do, and he's saved from certain death. He's rescued by the daughter of Pharaoh and then raised by his mom, who just happened to be there. I just love the fortuitousness of this story. Everybody happens to be in the right place at the right time. And he's brought into the house of Pharaoh to grow up, a Hebrew kid in the house of Pharaoh, while around him, everybody who's related to him is in slavery. Have you ever given thought to the fact that the house he lived in may have been built by his own fellow kin who were slaves? And so he grows up in this house, and the story gets created of who he is. Well, I know what I look like, but I'm actually the son of this guy. This is who I am, and this is who I'm going to be. Until one day the story shatters. And the story shatters when he hears this suffering. And he says, I can't do this anymore. And he goes outside, and in rage, in action, he kills one of the Egyptian soldiers and buries him in the sand. And then he feels good about that, apparently, because the next day he goes out and says, well, I'm just going to keep doing this. So I'm going to go and be a peacemaker to my brothers who are fighting. So he goes out to be a peacemaker to his brothers who are fighting, and they're like, who are you again? You're the kid who lives in the house that doesn't work like we work, right? So you're going to come? If you have children, you know this language. You're not the boss of me. You're going to come and solve this? Or are you going to kill us like you did the soldier? And every story of Moses just shattered in that moment, just blew into bits. Who he thought he was, the memory of the story of the place he had come from just falls to bits. And he runs into the wilderness. And when he runs into the wilderness, he comes into contact with God. Isn't it interesting how when we find ourselves in the most lonely, remote, dark places, that's often the place where we find God. And he shows up, and he's ambushed in the darkness by this burning bush. And it says, take off your shoes. And he says, yes, because when a burning bush tells you what to do, you do it. And what's interesting is the voice, the divine, calls out to him. And I wonder if while he's sitting there, he hears this. And the voice says, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. And Moses would have gone, oh, I have too. That's where I just was. I've heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Yeah, me too. And I got so fired up, I helped one of them disappear. We won't talk about that, will we? And then the next part. Indeed, I know their sufferings. I know what I heard. I've come down to deliver them from the Egyptians. That's what I thought I was doing. I thought I was following this thing that I should be doing. And then I wonder if Moses at that moment goes, oh, this isn't about you, is it? This is about me. This is about the fact that the stories my life has been telling all the way up to this point have come to their climax. And now you're ready to tell me who I really am. I'm not an Egyptian. And technically, I'm not really a Hebrew like everybody else is. I'm a liberator. I had this experience 2 years ago after experiencing a call to ministry early on. I found myself in the wilderness, and God said, you're not going to do what you thought you were going to do. How are we going to be okay with that? Some of you here today might be fighting with that same thing. I feel like God has formed me for this moment, and maybe you're in the wilderness and thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do now. And I wonder if there's just a story that's been told that you can recover if you begin to tap into your memories. In other words, who do we become? What do we become when we remember that God shapes our identity out of the memories that are already within us? Your vocation, your calling isn't somewhere out there. Your calling is to live in the kingdom and to respond to the story that God has already been telling through what you've read and what you've seen, what you've suffered. Which, of course, the Moses story then sets up this other story later on. We find ourselves in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is in chaos because of this wild new teacher, this carpenter who has come from Nazareth. Does anything really good come from Nazareth anyway? And he shows up and he has destabilized the order of everything. And he gathers together his closest buddies and he said, let's have dinner. And they were not confused about why they were having dinner because it was Passover. Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We're going to celebrate. That's what we're going to do. And so he calls them all together and they're like, yeah, we remember this. We remember the story. We're going to talk about it. We're going to tell the stories. We're going to say next year in Jerusalem, we're going to do all that stuff. And he brings them together. And instead of doing that, he gives them some different language. He changes what they remember. It says, then he took a loaf of bread. And when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And he did the same with the cup after supper, saying, the cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. Jesus took their story of what this moment was supposed to be and said, it is, but now it's also this. Henry Nouwen, in one of the most impactful books I've ever read called Life of the Beloved, takes this image and begins to put it on us. And he says, did you know that you are chosen? You are taken. Like the bread, you have been taken and invited by Jesus to be a part of this kingdom. But not just taken because you can be taken and tolerated. That's what happens in gym class when you pick people for dodgeball. I guess you're the last one. Come on my team. This isn't Jesus being tolerant. This is an invitation with also a blessing. Jesus takes the bread and blesses it, speaks well of it, and says, you're good. I'm exceedingly fond of you. You belong here. And then he breaks it and says, this is my body that's about to get broken. What he says in 2 words there is, I understand because I'm about to experience what you've experienced, but just know that doesn't change whether you belong here or not. And you're also given because bread that isn't broken can't be distributed. You cannot be the gift to the world that you're supposed to be if you are not shattered into pieces sometimes. This is the story that's been told. We try to tell this story to a group of 20-somethings that gather at our house once a month. And we introduce them to this tradition. After they'd come for a while, we asked them, we want you guys to sign the bottom of our dining room table. Nothing says welcome like graffiti our table. And we're actually getting to the point now where we're going to probably need a new table because we got a lot of writing underneath there and drawings and things. We give them a Sharpie and we ask them to lay underneath the table and sign it. And this is what that looks like. This isn't a crime scene. I know it looks like some bad things have happened there. We gave them plenty to drink and eat, and then we said, lay on your backs and write something. It'll be awesome. But the reason we do that is because we want to echo this memory. We want to give them something different to remember, that no matter where they go in the world, no matter what they experience, no matter who hurts them or wounds them, they will know there's a place in this kingdom where there's a table with your name on it. You're not just tolerated, you're blessed. And no matter what kind of brokenness you bring, there will be a cup, and there will be a plate, and someone will sit down and look at you and say, it's good that you're here. And now be the gift you were meant to be to the world. So the question is this: what do we become when we remember that we are more than just tolerated participants at the table? What do we become when we remember that Jesus isn't just like, yeah, okay, but is actually welcoming us and inviting us? Which reminds me of something else. This is just a tip for you if you're moving anytime soon. If you're about to move across the country, and you have 24 hours to load everything you have into a U-Haul truck and make the long trip from Ohio to Illinois, do not invite the people to help you move who are most likely to have been drinking. Trust me on this. We were moving in 2000, my wife and I were moving from Columbus, Ohio to Springfield, Illinois, and we had 24 hours to load all of our stuff on a 26-foot U-Haul truck and move across the country. At least as far as we knew. Kansas is further, And so we got busy. My friend Jesse and I began to load the truck. Now that day was really horrible because it had iced over at the beginning of the day. And so we chipped the ice off the truck, pulled it over to the apartment in the backyard, in the back parking lot. And so we began to load things. And the sun got cantered high in the sky and it began to melt everything, which was great. And so we're loading stuff and we're like, we're never gonna get this done. So we made the phone call that we should have never made, and all of our friends came, and yes, they were all fairly in the bag when they got to our house. If you wanna know what that looks like, remember the scene from The Hobbit when all the dwarves show up at Bilbo's house? That, only with boxes. And so finally we got the truck loaded, we shut the door, it was starting to get dark, it was excellent. And we went inside to get something to eat. While we were inside, a feat of modern physics happened. The truck actually began to slide on the leftover icy parts of the driveway and slid into the yard, which is soaking wet. Now, I don't know if you've ever had this experience of trying to drive a 26-foot U-Haul truck out of wet ground. The wheels dug into about 1/4 of an inch above the wheel well. And I'm standing there beside my friend, and I'm looking down with this wheel sunk halfway in the ground. And Jesse's looking at me, and he's like, Casey, what are we gonna do? And I'm like, I can't believe the truck's in a hole. And he said, Casey, what are you gonna do? And I'm like, I can't believe the truck's in a hole. And I sort of yelled Charlton Heston style. It was like, people move every day. Why me? And so we called a tow truck, which we couldn't afford, that pulled the truck out, and we got everything set up, put a trailer on the back, put my car on the back of the trailer. We were ready to go the next day. Next day we get up. It is pouring rain. Pouring. Got to go out, set some things. I am soaked. I get in the cab of the truck. We drive. As we're going across the great state of Indiana, the temperature shifts from like 50 degrees to like 17 degrees. Everything wet is now icy. We get to our destination. The locks on my car on the back of the trailer, which we have to take off before we can get the stuff out, is actually frozen. So I'm sitting in the front seat of my father-in-law's car. They lived in Springfield at the time. He's got a blowtorch inside the car. And I'm heating up the key and jumping out and jamming it in the lock and jumping back in. And we heat up the key again and jam it in the lock. We finally got it out, pulled the car off, got the stuff where it needed to go. We parked the truck. We sat down to pizza. And it was the best pizza I have ever had in my entire life. I had it later and I was like, ugh. But that moment, it was fantastic. And I think about that, and I think about a story that a neurosurgeon named Richard Restack tells. He talks about when he brings in new students who want to be neurosurgeons, and he knows it's going to be a trial for them. He said, so I bring them in early, and I show them how cool and how amazing what they're about to do is. He brings them in so that one day they would have something called a future memory. He says, when they get to the point where they say, this isn't worth it, why did I ever get into this? And the future memory is that part that revives them. And they feel again what they experienced when they made up their minds about what they wanted to do. And when I think about this whole move and I think about that quote, I then also think about the book of Revelation, like you do. I used to teach Bible college, and I realized that Revelation is simultaneously the most terrifying and sexy book of the entire New Testament. Because everybody wants to talk about it, but nobody wants to read it. It's true. You're laughing because it's true. And I think about this story in Revelation, and with all the beasts and the blood and the fire and all of that stuff, at the center of this story, I just try to remember the center of the story is this: Babylon fell. Babylons always fall. Darkness always fails. Oppressive, power-hungry tyrants always get what's coming to them eventually. The truck is not always in a hole. It's a future memory. God forms us with our memories to remember someday this will pass. For the people in Revelation, the letter was, this isn't just past tense. This is about the future. All Babylons fall. Hang in there. One day this won't be true. One day the kingdom will triumph completely and fully. One day the truck will not be in a hole. And you'll know where your toothbrush is. So hang on. Cling to that resiliency, because all of this stuff is contingent. It's hanging on by a thread. All of our fragile experiments with the boundary between the divine and the human, all of those things will one day pass. And there will be this beautiful moment where we get to fully embrace the whole deal. And since I'm speaking at a Quaker university, I figured I should quote Thomas Kelly. He says, we're forever bringing all affairs down into the light. All affairs down into the light, holding them there in the presence, re-seeing them and the whole of the world of men and things in a new and overturning way, and responding to them in spontaneous, incisive, and simple ways of love and faith. So what is it that we become? What do we become when we remember a joy that has yet to fully come, but is arriving in its own time? What do we become when we remember, hey, the truck won't always be in a hole. One day Babylon will fall. This doesn't get to win. Of course, not every memory is kind. As I've been talking, no doubt the memories have come to your mind. Some that are wonderful, and you're like, yes, and some that are painful, and you're like, oh. But all those memories belong. They're all making us who we are, so we need to engage with them. So they're part of our process of formation. And so, because of that, I have to say, there are some things you should never say to children. The late 30-something dad with his arms crossed, exhausted from working more than he should have, his brain on other things and other priorities, and the beautiful little girl with the blue bike helmet. She pulls around in front of him, she slams the bike down and says, "I'm not doing this anymore." And he switches his posture and he says, "I don't have time to teach babies how to ride bikes. If you would like to cut the legs out from under a 5-year-old, compare them to a toddler." And as soon as it came out, her little lips started to quiver and the tears started to flow. And this immense sense of regret just came over me. She's 12 now, and she has no idea about this story. I've asked her, and she's like, "You're crazy. I don't remember any of that." But I do. And as I was writing this part of the book, I sat down with that image, and I imagined myself at the table with the divine. And he reached out his hands, and in his hands was this beautiful blue bike helmet. And I knew what it was. And he said, "This is yours." And I said, "No, it's not. That's in the past. I don't want that." He said, "This is yours." And I said, "No, I will not think about that. I won't even come back to that. I don't want it." And then I looked down, and I realized the divine hands had never left the helmet. And so I put my hands on it, and God said, "This is ours." What do we become when we remember that we never remember by ourselves? That which is painful and poetic, that which is brutal and beautiful, that which is glorious and gory, we never remember by ourselves. We have a redeeming presence that has put us in an unshakable kingdom who says, "This is ours." Blessings, friends.